Nina, a widow grieving the loss of her husband, becomes trapped in a mystical tale. The spirit of Ranga, her late husband, returns. Nina sat in silence on the edge of her bed. She felt the coldness of the dark and desolate room. The only presence was the haunting image of Ranga, her husband, that lingered in her thoughts. Ranga, her husband, who had met a tragic end in a horrifying accident a year ago. Nina could never forget the image of Ranga covered in blood when she found him among the wreckage of the car. She could never escape the burden of guilt and the soul-crushing sorrow that haunted her. Nina longed for Ranga, who had always been by her side, offering love and hope. Nina felt her heart racing in the midst of the dark room. She felt alone and yet not alone. Something lurked in the shadows, something cold and frightening. Nina shivered as she felt something gently touch her shoulder. She turned around quickly, but there was no one there, only the night wind blowing through the window. Nina screamed in fear. She was sure something was amiss. Something wanted to disrupt her peace. That night, Nina couldn't close her eyes due to the never-ending terror. Nina felt like she had just woken up from a nightmare. Her head throbbed as if someone was knocking from the inside. She couldn't remember what had happened the night before. She walked drowsily to the bathroom and looked into the mirror. Her reflection appeared like a living corpse, pale and dry. She felt nauseous and queasy. Suddenly, she heard whispered voices in her ears. The voices threatened her not to touch any food. Nina panicked and grew irate, shouting incomprehensible words. Nina was no longer the same person she once was. She had transformed into a terrifying, harsh, and violent figure. She frequently lashed out at people around her, including her loving mother. Nina's family felt desperate and confused. They decided to take Nina to the home of Mbah Sastro, a renowned spiritual healer in their village. They hoped that Mbah Sastro could free Nina from the curse that plagued her. Upon reaching Mbah Sastro's home, Nina's family immediately entrusted her to the healer. Mbah Sastro brought Nina to his private room and commenced a banishment ritual. He recited prayers with unwavering determination for an hour, trying to identify the entity that troubled Nina. After the ritual, Mbah Sastro emerged from his room and informed Nina's family that Nina was possessed by the spirit of Ranga, her deceased husband. Mbah Sastro explained that Ranga's spirit still held deep affection for Nina and yearned to be close to her. However, due to Nina's overwhelming grief and loneliness, Ranga's spirit had absorbed her negative emotions, ultimately entering her body. Mbah Sastro embarked on a challenging task of expelling Ranga's spirit from Nina. The ritual was intense as Ranga's spirit fiercely resisted, screaming and putting up a vigorous fight. Mbah Sastro had to pray and perform rituals throughout the night without pause. After a relentless struggle, Mbah Sastro managed to establish communication with Ranga's spirit. He conveyed a message that it was time for Ranga to leave Nina and allow her to lead a happy life. Reluctantly, Ranga's spirit relented and released Nina from its grasp. Nina was finally liberated from the curse of her deceased husband. She felt relieved and happy. She could return to her true self, free from the strange voices and the disruptions to her personality. Mbah Sastro informed Nina's family that her husband's spirit had departed peacefully to the afterlife. Nina was immensely grateful and pledged to let go of her grief and live her life more fully. Nina could finally smile again after enduring a long, harrowing nightmare. She began to regain her confidence and ventured outside to socialize with those around her. She frequently visited her neighbors to chat and have fun. Her family was overjoyed to see Nina back to her cheerful and optimistic self. Nina was engrossed in watching television alone at home. One evening, as the sky began to darken, the lights suddenly went out, plunging the house into darkness. Nina felt shocked and bewildered. She attempted to turn on the lights, but it was futile. Something was amiss with the house. Fear and anxiety began to envelop her. Nina sensed that there was something peculiar in her home. She heard a knocking sound coming from the kitchen. She cautiously made her way towards the source of the sound. In the kitchen, there was no one or any creature. There was only the continuous loud and fast-paced knocking. Nina felt terrified and desired to flee. As she turned around, she screamed in shock. Before her eyes, a shadowy figure gazed at her with glowing red eyes. Nina felt as though she had just entered a never-ending nightmare. She heard strange, menacing sounds coming from the shadowy figure in front of her. The voice whispered, "Don't be afraid, Nina. It's me, Ranga. I've returned to protect you." Nina's breath caught, and her body went limp. She screamed in hysterics and fainted on the spot. She woke up in the hospital the following day in a state of severe shock. As it turned out, Ranga's spirit had not fully left and was unwilling to let go of Nina. Nina felt that no one understood or believed her. She continued to tell her terrifying story to her family and the doctors who cared for her. However, they all thought Nina was hallucinating due to her past trauma. They believed Nina couldn't come to terms with her husband's death, creating illusions in her head. They were unaware that Ranga's spirit genuinely existed and continued to haunt Nina. Nina felt something whispering gently in her ear, tempting her, "Don't be afraid, Nina. I'm here to protect you." She opened her eyes and was shocked to see a terrifying, lurking shadow from the corner of the room. Nina screamed in fear, calling for her mother who was sleeping in the adjacent room. Nina was immensely frightened upon seeing the terrifying figure in her room. Her mother, hearing her screams, quickly entered and looked at Nina with concern. But she saw nothing unusual other than Nina trembling. Her mother gently stroked Nina's hair and assured her that it was just a nightmare. However, Nina insisted that it wasn't a dream. She felt the presence was all too real. The following day, Nina received a visit from Mbah Sastro at the hospital. Mbah Sastro listened to Nina's story and sensed something unusual. He planned to conduct a special ritual that evening to uncover the truth. Mbah Sastro prayed and recited ancient mantras for hours, entering into a trance-like state. In this trance, he revealed that there was an evil spirit pretending to be Ranga to haunt Nina. The malevolent spirit was the real reason behind Nina's distress. Mbah Sastro prepared for a ritual to expel the malevolent spirit. Mbah Sastro performed a spirit-calling ritual at Nina's house that night. He set up ritual tools such as candles, incense, and papers inscribed with ancient mantras. Suddenly, the lights flickered and a strong gust of wind swept through the house. Mbah Sastro commenced his ritual by lighting the incense and calling upon the spirit to reveal itself. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense. A dark shadow appeared and moved about them. The shadow spoke menacingly, "I won't go. I love Nina." Mbah Sastro stared coldly at the shadow and recited protective mantras. The shadow grew furious, hurling objects toward Mbah Sastro. A fierce battle unfolded between Mbah Sastro and the malevolent spirit. After struggling for hours, Mbah Sastro finally found a way to defeat the malevolent spirit. He recited a potent expulsion mantra. The black shadow screamed in agony before vanishing completely. The next day, Nina felt much better. The malevolent spirit had been successfully banished by Mbah Sastro. The situation returned to normal and became peaceful. Nina was grateful for being freed from the supernatural entity that had tormented her. Mbah Sastro gained more respect from the villagers for his ability to ward off evil spirits. End.